Hey folks, welcome back to the Parallax in PowerPoint Masterclass series. Today, in part 4, we'll be talking about creating a depth of field parallax with float-in objects. For example, and then we'll learn how to create a depth of field parallax using 3D objects. This video will be pretty long, so use the time codes to skip sections and watch at your own speed. So let's get cracking. Starting with depth of field with float-in objects, let's first take a closer look at what's in the slides. So as we can see, there are multiple effects taking place simultaneously. First is the text floating in from the left, replacing the previous text. The second is the background doing a Y parallax transition from the bottom. Then we have a few typographical effects going on. Next we have our float-in objects, which are the birds that come floating from the top and the bottom. And finally we have our depth of field with the P and this blurred out seagull. Now because this seagull is closer to the viewer's perspective, it's blurred and hence it helps create a depth of field. So now that we've explored the slides, let's get designing. We'll begin by opening a new page and setting up the first slide. So insert an image for our background. Let's crop it to the 16:9 aspect ratio and let's drag it to fill the slide. Next, let's add our text. We'll create two separate text boxes, one saying depth, and then we'll duplicate it and we'll say off field. Now let's update the fonts. For this I'm using Montserrat Black. Having chosen the font, let's make it nice and big. Let's right click on the text box, go to Format Shape, go to Text Options, and in Text Fill we add No Fill, and in Text Outline let's give it a solid fill. Let's change the outline color to white, and we can increase the line width a little bit as well. So I've increased it to about 2 points. Then in Text Effects, let's go down and give it a little bit of a drop shadow. Let's increase the blur and the size of the shadow just by a few points. Then we can go to Format Painter and paint the same effects onto our second text box. So now we have the initial text ready. Let's just open a new slide and bring one of the text boxes here. Let's give it a solid fill. Let's say black and no outline and no shadow. Let's delete everything but D and increase the font size. Basically what we need to do is convert this text box into a shape so that we can fill the image into it. So let's drag a rectangle behind it. Let's remove the fill from the text box. There we go. Select the rectangle first and then the text box, go to Merge Shapes and click on Intersect. So now we've converted the text into a shape. Let's bring it over here and let's adjust its size. Let's remove the shape outline. Click on the background, copy it, go to the shape, fill, picture fill from clipboard. Then go to Picture Format, click on Crop, and adjust the dimensions of the image so it matches the background. Then in Shape Options, let's go and give the shape a shadow. Let's increase the size of the shadow a bit and the blur. And finally, in corrections, let's make the image a little more lighter than the background so it stands out just a little bit. Then select the text box saying depth, right click on it and bring it to front. Then we can position them however we want. And we have our first slide ready. Let's take a look at it in full screen. Not too bad. Let's create the second slide. So, new slide, and let's paste our image in. And like previously, let's crop it to the 16:9 aspect ratio. Now remember, it's important for the second image to be a long image for the wipe parallax to work properly. Let's fill the slide with the image. And let's bring in our other elements. So I'll just copy this group and bring it over to the second slide. And we can change the words here. Let's ungroup this. Change this to para and second text box. And of course, we'll need to change the D to a P. So once again, let's grab a text box, bring it over here. Remove all the settings. And delete everything but the P. Draw a rectangle behind the P. Center back. Select the rectangle and the P and intersect it to create the shape. Now we can bring it back up to the slide and match the size. We can also format paint from the previous shape to the new shape. Place it wherever we need to. Copy our background image. Go to the P, Picture Fill from Clipboard. And once again, in picture format, we can increase the brightness so that the P picture stands out a little better. Finally, we bring the para text box to the front and adjust the positioning of the second text box. To match the positioning between the two slides, you could also use guides. Let's group all the elements on this slide, apart from the background. And for our final step on this particular slide, let's bring in the birds. So I've already cut out a PNG with these birds flying. Now all we need to do is crop them into separate birds and put them onto the slide. So I'll quickly do that. Now that we have our birds cropped, let's copy all of them and take them onto the slide and place them however we want. So we take the first PNG of the bird, drag it to enlarge it, go to Artistic Effects and add the blur to it. Maybe take one bird. Let's increase the size of this bird and put it behind the P. So center back and position the other birds wherever we want. And we can duplicate more of the birds to fill up the slide. Let's take a look in full screen. And it looks pretty good. I just realized I made a small mistake in this slide. I forgot to adjust the background image in the letter P. So let's quickly take care of that. There we go. So now we have our two slides ready, and they look pretty good. It's time to set up the parallax effects. So first of all, we'll start with slide number 1. Let's bring over everything we have from slide number 2 onto slide number 1. So copy and paste it. Then drag the group with the text in it off to the left. And then drag the birds to the top and the bottom. Make sure to change the spacing between all the objects so they flow in at different rates when we initiate the parallax. Finally, click on the image, go to Picture Format and Crop it down to outside the borders of the slide. Check in full screen once that nothing is overlapping. Select everything from the original slide and make sure it's sent to back. Then select everything again and copy it. Bring it to slide number 2. Select the text box and drag it off to the right. Select the background and send it to the back. And finally, in the transitions, give it a morph transition and increase the duration up to 3 seconds. So I've not tested this out. Let's see if it works. And that's beautiful. So we've just learned not only how to make these beautiful typographical slides, but also how to create multiple parallax effects using float-in objects and a great depth of field. Let's move on to the second part of the tutorial, which is depth of field using 3D objects. So let's take a closer look at the slides. That looks really beautiful. So let's see what's happening in these slides. First of all, we have a text floating in from the right. The background image is slowly becoming smaller, and we have layers of fruit floating in, and some of the fruit are actually rotating. As you can see, the ones in the front are slowly spinning as they come in, and the closest ones to the viewer are blurred. So let's see how we can create this. Let's open a new slide and bring in our background image. Let's resize the image to fit our background. Crop it to 16 by 9. And basically all we need to do on this slide right now is extend the image a little beyond the borders of the slide. If you have the guides enabled, it'll be easier for you to tell where the borders of the slides are. Then let's duplicate this slide and make the image fit the borders. So if we add a morph transition to this and play it, we can see that the slide background image slowly becomes smaller. The next step is to bring in all the 3D objects and our text. So I'll just add a text box. Let's copy it over from our existing slide. Let's place it where we want it to appear in the final slide. So we have two text boxes right now. Let's open a new slide and bring in our first layer of fruit. And let's create a new slide for every layer of fruit that we'll be using. So we have limes on the first, then lemons, then oranges, and finally we'll get grapefruit. Let's make multiple copies of each slice. Let's select them all, copy them and paste them on to the final slide, just so we know where we'll be putting them finally. So adjust the placement and the size of all the fruit. Let's group all the fruit once we have it placed properly. Let's go to our selection pane and rename the group to lime. This will help us keep track of it better. And similarly, let's create grouped layers for all our different fruit. Adjust them however you like. Select all of them and group them. Let's call this group lemons. Once again, we can bring our text to the front. Of course, we can reduce the number of fruit if we need to. Let's create another group for the oranges. And finally, let's create a group for our grapefruit. Now for the grapefruit, we saw that the grapefruit was blurred, so let's select each picture and blur it out. Having done that, let's select all of them and take them to our main slide. Let's adjust their positioning and let's group them for now into a group called grapefruit. Now all we need to do is select all these groups that we've created and the text boxes, copy them and take them over to slide number 1. Let's select the lime group and move it to the left just outside the borders of the slide. Then select the lemon group and take it a little beyond but overlapping the limes. Similarly with the oranges and finally with the grapefruit. So we have a cloud of fruit that's extending way beyond the borders of our slide. And finally, let's select our text boxes and drag it off to the right and the subtext box even further right. So now let's have a look at this in full screen. We've already added the morph transition and it came in really fast, so let's increase our transition timing to at least 4 seconds. So we can see clearly what's happening. The background gets smaller and the fruit comes in at different speeds and so does the text. Now having done that, we need to make some of this fruit rotate as it flows in. So let's go back to slide number 1. Let's go to the grapefruit and ungroup it. Select the rounded handles and turn them over so they're almost upside down. And then simply go to slide number 2 and ungroup the grapefruit again. So if we see it in full screen, This time, the grapefruit will be rotating. And you can do this easily with all the layers of fruit if you want all of them to rotate. So this time let's go to the oranges, ungroup them, and again, and rotate them till they're upside down. And finally, let's go to slide number 2, select the oranges and ungroup them. Let's take one final look. That is beautiful. So as we've seen in today's lesson, we can use this depth of field effect along with parallax to create some stunning slides, with only your imagination being the limit. And if you stuck around till the end of this video, I'll leave you with one more inspiration tip. You could design something like this. So a slide full of leaves and flowers that slowly parts and rotates to reveal the picture behind it. And if you notice, the picture also changes from grayscale to color as it becomes smaller. So that's just a little design inspiration for you, and I look forward to hearing any comments that you may have for using this method. I hope you find this content helpful. Hit the like and subscribe buttons to show your love. Once again, thank you for watching, and remember to keep on creating.